My phone buzzed while I was sitting in my car outside a strip mall, trying to convince myself that lukewarm coffee counted as lunch. The alert banner slid down like it owned the place. Final payment. The merchant name was clear enough to read. The amount was not small. Everything else was blurred in the screenshot I took, but the structure was unmistakable. And the memo line. The memo line used a phrase I'd heard exactly one family say, over and over, like a spell: keep things smooth. 2 days after I called off my wedding, someone paid a vendor I'd never authorized and signed it with their manners. Let me back up. 2 days after I called off my wedding, I was still moving like someone who'd left an appliance running at home. Not panicked, just braced. My apartment in the Raleigh suburbs felt too quiet, like it was waiting for the next notification to land. I'd returned a ring. I'd canceled a venue tour. I'd texted my friends the kind of message you write 3 times before you hit send. The part I didn't say out loud, I was proud of myself, and also kind of terrified. My coffee kept going cold because every time I took a sip, my phone buzzed. I didn't call off my wedding in a dramatic way. No shouting, no thrown things. Just one sentence that felt like lifting a heavy box off my chest. Ethan, I can't do this. He had blinked like I'd switched languages mid-conversation. Ethan was charming, conflict avoidant. A man who believed the word mess was a medical condition you could catch. He'd said, "Claire, you're spiraling." And I'd said, calmly, "No, I'm noticing." Diane was my almost mother-in-law. Polished. Strategic. The kind of woman who could weaponize a casserole. She never asked directly for control. She offered it, like a gift you couldn't refuse without looking ungrateful. Let me handle it quietly. I'll take care of the vendor chaos. We'll keep things smooth. It sounded like kindness until you realized smooth meant silent and help came with invisible strings. The alert had a timestamp, 2 minutes old. I stared at the words like they might rearrange themselves into something harmless. They didn't. I took a screenshot immediately, blurred it the way you do when you don't trust your own future self not to overshare, but I kept the structure readable. Merchant name, amount. Final payment, memo line, and that phrase. Keep things smooth. It landed in my stomach like a coin. I opened the transaction details with the careful dread of someone clicking reply all. The card last 4 listed there were not mine. I knew my numbers the way you know your favorite takeout order. Screenshot number 2. Transaction detail page, last 4 digits visible, everything else blurred. It wasn't my debit card. It wasn't my credit card, which should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me feel hunted. Because if it wasn't mine, why was it tied to my life? I called the bank. A recorded voice thanked me for being a valued customer and offered me 3 different ways to do the thing I was already trying. What to do? I sat in my car with my coffee going cold and watched people carry grocery bags like the world hadn't shifted under my feet. When the representative picked up, I kept my voice steady. "Hi, I'm seeing a final payment charge I didn't authorize." She asked me to verify my identity. I did. Then she said carefully, "I can see the transaction. I can't discuss the account holder on the card used." That line was familiar. Banks had boundaries. I just hadn't expected to need one from them. Then she said the words I didn't want to hear. "This looks like a card update." "A card update?" I repeated. She explained, in a script soft voice, that sometimes merchants update a card on file through an authorization process. She didn't give me details. She couldn't. But she did give me something useful. The merchant submitted it as a final installment related to a prior authorization. A prior authorization. Like a deposit, like something a bride might have paid months ago. I wasn't just looking at fraud. I was looking at my own past decisions being used like a doorway. The merchant name on the alert wasn't our venue. It wasn't our caterer. It wasn't the photographer. It was something bland and corporate sounding, like it could be anything. Carolina Event Solutions, which is exactly the kind of name that makes you think, Sure, that exists. And that's how you get tricked. I searched it. It came up as a vendor management company that handled payments for multiple venues. Great. A middleman. Because if you're going to quietly control someone, it helps to hide behind a processing company with a polite logo. Carolina Event Solutions. This is Marisol. How can I help you? I said, Hi, I'm calling about a charge that hit my bank labeled final payment. There was a tiny pause. Then she said, Okay, Claire, I'm pulling up your file. My spine went cold. I hadn't given her my last name. I hadn't given her an invoice number. I hadn't given her anything except a phrase and a problem. I wrote down the exact time the call started and the greeting she used, like my life had become a case file. She had a file with my wedding in it. I can confirm we processed a final payment today, she said, under invoice number CES-48117. She read the number slowly. I repeated it back. Amon wrote it down. Can you email me the receipt? I asked. We already did, she said, and my stomach dropped again. To which email address? She read out an address that wasn't mine. It was an old email I'd used once when I was 22 and thought I'd become a person who organized receipts. I hadn't touched it in years. Someone else had. I asked her who updated the email. She hesitated. I'm sorry, she said. I can't disclose who made changes to the file. Of course she couldn't, but she added, I can tell you the update request came in last week. Last week? While Ethan and I were still together, while Diane was still sending me smiley face texts about table linens, and while I still had my wedding planning folder synced on Ethan's iPad. So I drove to the bank. I could have handled this over the phone, but I needed a human, a desk, a place where someone couldn't hang up on me and call it policy. I booked the first appointment I could, screenshot of the appointment confirmation, time, location, my name. In the parking lot, my coffee went cold again because my hands were shaking just enough to make the lid rattle. I walked in anyway. Calm face, stormy brain. That's where I met Nate. Nate was the kind of professional calm that feels like a weighted blanket. He didn't flinch when I showed him the screenshots. I placed my phone down and zoomed in on the final payment structure, the card last four that wasn't mine, the timestamp, the memo line phrase. He nodded slowly. You did the right thing, taking more screenshots, he said. We can't always retrieve the exact display later. That's comforting, I said, dryly, and he almost smiled. Then he said, Here's what I can tell you. The transaction was processed using a digital wallet token. Not my wallet, not my card. A token. Like someone had attached my life to a payment method that wasn't mine and hoped I'd just accept it. Can we prove whose token it was? I asked. Nate couldn't tell me whose. Privacy rules. But he could help me build a timeline. Who knew about the vendor? He asked. I laughed once without humor. Everyone. He said, Okay, then we narrow it to who knew enough to update the file. I pulled up my call log. There it was. Diane calling me last week. Twice. Both times, right? Oh, and after Ethan and I had talked about finalizing some vendor details. Ethan had called me after, too. Short call, 31 seconds, like he'd been relaying a message, not having a conversation. I took screenshots of the call log with the times visible, not because I wanted to accuse anyone, because I wanted the truth to survive my second guessing. Nate said, There's another thing. Nate explained that merchants sometimes send a receipt that includes a paid by field or initials tied to the payer profile. If you can get that receipt, he said, it may not be your name. I told him the vendor emailed it to an old address. Can you access it? He asked. I could. I just hadn't in years. My coffee was cold enough to count as punishment. I reset the password in the end, then, bank lobby, not dramatic, just practical. And there it was, a PDF receipt, final payment receipt, timestamp from that morning, and a line that made my stomach go tight. Paid by D.H. Diane's initials were D.M., but Diane's full name was Diane Hartwell. D.H., like someone forgot which version of themselves they use in polite society. I didn't tell Nate yet. I called Ethan first. Ethan answered on the second ring, sounding like he was in a grocery aisle. "Hey," he said. "Too casual." I kept my voice level. "Did you authorize a final payment to Carolina Event Solutions?" Silence. Then, "What?" "No." "Why would I?" I said, "Because it's tied to my wedding file, and the memo line says, keep things smooth." He exhaled like I was making him. "I carry something heavy." "Claire." "You're reading into that," he said. "It's probably automated. Vendors use templates." "It's not a template," I said. "It's a phrase your mom says." He went softer. "My mom's been upset. She just wants things to settle." He didn't deny it. He just tried to wrap it in soft paper. I asked him one question he couldn't dodge. "Ethan," I said, "does your mom have access to your iPad?" He paused. "Not long. Just enough." "Sometimes," he said. "If she's helping with something?" There it was again. "Helping. Does she have the password?" "Claire," he said, warning in his voice now. "Don't do this." I kept it calm. "I'm doing it. I'm asking." He said, "Yes. She has it. It's not a big deal." And that's when I realized the wedding folder wasn't just mine. It had been a shared access point. So I went home and opened my planning binder. My wedding planning binder was half nostalgia, half administrative threat. I'd kept it because I thought I might need it to untangle deposits. I didn't expect it to become evidence. I flipped to the Payments tab and pulled out the printed vendor summary Diane had given me at brunch weeks ago. "I love a tidy system," she'd said. I'd smiled and thanked her like a normal person. Now, I looked closer. Someone had added a sticky note in neat handwriting. "Final payment handled. Keep things smooth." I took a photo of the sticky note next to the vendor page, timestamp visible on my phone. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first. Then I did. The Diane's thank you card handwriting, the same loop on the G. The sticky note wasn't the worst thing in the folder. I opened my cloud storage activity log. I'm a project manager. I live in logs. Logs are where feelings go to become facts. The wedding planning folder showed activity from a device I didn't own. Ethan's iPad. Last week. Same day Diane called me twice. Same day Ethan called for 31 seconds. It wasn't a guess anymore. It wasn't a vibe. It was a timeline. And the vendor email chain had one more detail. Back in the old email account, I opened the full chain. I didn't need to read every word to understand the structure. The subject lines told the story like a set of road signs. Updated card on file. Final payment confirmation. And more tucked in there. Cancellation policy attached. Cancellation policy. That made my throat tighten. Because if someone paid a final payment right after I called off the wedding, it wasn't about completing the wedding. It was about triggering a fee, a consequence, a punishment dressed as a policy. I realized the final payment wasn't for the wedding. It was for the fallout. I called Carolina Event Solutions back and asked one question carefully. Is this final payment tied to a cancellation fee? The rep paused, then said, "Yes, ma'am." The event status was updated? Updated. By someone? I requested a resend of the invoice PDF to my current email, and after a few verification steps, she agreed to send a summary. The invoice number matched. The CES-48117, the line item, cancellation fee. This wasn't finishing the wedding. This was billing me for choosing myself. Then I saw who requested the status update. On the invoice summary, there was a tiny line. Requested by DH, screenshot, zoomed, date/time in the corner. Diane Hartwell. Not Ethan. Not me. Diane. My almost mother-in-law had told a vendor the wedding was canceled, then paid the cancellation fee using a card not mine, and attached it to my wedding file so it would follow me like a shadow. It was the cleanest sabotage I'd ever seen. No yelling, no threats, just paperwork. I thought that was the twist. It wasn't. Diane texted me an hour later, like she'd been watching the clock. "We should talk. I'm happy to help. You fix this. Fix this." As if she hadn't created it. I didn't respond. I sat at my kitchen table with cold coffee and stared at the word help until it looked like it belonged to another language. Nate called me back with something that changed the whole shape of it. Nate called to confirm the dispute was opened and my account was secured. He told me the case number, and I wrote it down on the same page as the invoice number. 2 numbers, 2 tracks. Then he said, "I can't tell you who used the token, but I can tell you something else. The memo line was entered manually." Manually. Keep things smooth wasn't a vendor template. It was a signature. And then I found the major twist in my own files. I went back to my planning binder and pulled out a budget summary. Diane had made. I'd assumed it was a generous gesture. But in the margins, in her neat handwriting, was a small note. Family contribution to be reimbursed if plans change. Reimbursed, like a loan, like leverage. I photographed the margin note, and I remembered a conversation from weeks earlier where Diane had insisted, sweetly, that she didn't want to burden us. But she'd also insisted we use vendors she trusted. Vendors that routed payments through her preferred system. Vendors that made it easy to keep things smooth. Suddenly the wedding wasn't the point. The system was. In the email chain buried under replies, I found a forwarded message header. FWD. Updated card on file. From Ethan to Diane. Timestamp last week. I took the screenshot of the header with the subject line visible, blurred the addresses except the names, and stared at it until my eyes felt dry. Ethan hadn't paid the fee, but he'd handed Diane the map. He'd forwarded her access. He'd turned my planning file into a shared resource, then acted surprised when she used it like a lever. That's what conflict avoidance looks like when it grows teeth. It doesn't punch you. It steps aside and lets someone else do it politely. I didn't call him angry. I called him prepared. I asked Ethan to meet me at a coffee shop off Falls of Noose. Neutral ground, bright windows, plenty of witnesses. Not because I expected a scene, but because I expected denial. He showed up looking tired, like he'd been carrying the weight of other people's feelings and calling it love. I didn't raise my voice. I slid my phone across the table and showed him the final payment screenshot first, then the invoice number, then the paid by DH field, then the forwarded email header from him to Diane. One by one, I let the evidence do the talking. He swallowed. "Claire." She was trying to keep it from getting messy. I nodded. Yes, she kept it smooth. That's the problem. He tried softly. She thought if you saw the cost, you'd reconsider. And there it was. Money as control, quiet coercion disguised as help. Then Diane walked in. Diane approached like she belonged anywhere she decided to be. "Claire," she said warmly, like we were about to discuss paint colors. Ethan stood halfway, mine uncertain. Diane sat anyway. "I heard you were upset," she said. "I'm happy to handle this quietly." I looked at her. I didn't insult her. I didn't accuse her with adjectives. I used nouns. "You updated the vendor file," I said. "You triggered a cancellation fee. You paid it with a card not connected to me. You used the memo line, 'Keep things smooth.'" She blinked once. Then she smiled, small. "I did what needed doing." "No," I said. "You did what benefited you." Ethan's voice cracked barely. "Mom." She cut her eyes at him, polite as a knife. "Ethan, let the adults speak." And that told me everything. I didn't argue. I set a boundary. I slid one page forward. Not dramatic, just organized. At the top, bank dispute case. My number. Under it, Invoice number CES-48117, dates, times, screenshots referenced. "Here's what's happening," I said. "My accounts are locked down, the dispute is filed, the vendor has been notified, and I'm documenting this. All of it." Diane's smile tightened. "Claire, you're being extreme." I nodded once. "No, I'm being accurate." Then I looked at Ethan. "You forwarded her access. That means you were willing to let her manage me. I'm not available for that." He whispered, "I didn't think she'd—" I cut in gently. "That's the point. You never think. You let it stay smooth." Diane opened her mouth. I held up my hand, calm. "We're done. You won't contact my vendors. You won't contact my bank. You won't contact me unless it's in their writing." There was no shouting, just a door closing. Diane tried one last move. Diane tapped the envelope she'd brought. "We paid," she said, as if that settled everything. "We handled it. You're welcome." I didn't touch the envelope. I didn't open it. "That's not a gift," I said. "That's a leash." Her eyes hardened for half a second before she put the smile back on. "You'll regret making this ugly," she said softly. I kept my voice low. "You made it ugly. I just stopped pretending it was pretty." Ethan looked between us like he wanted to disappear into the foam on his latte. I stood. I picked up my cold coffee. "Keep it smooth," I said, almost gently, "but do it without me." Then I walked out and felt my body unclench. Quiet justice looks, well, boring on camera. It looks like printing screenshots and labeling them. It looks like emailing a vendor. Please note, I did not authorize this update. Direct all communication to me in writing. It looks like saving a PDF receipt and naming it with the date and invoice number. It looks like changing passwords and removing device access. I removed Ethan's iPad from my folder permissions. I changed my old email password to something long and ridiculous. I set my bank alerts to notify me if a squirrel sneezed near my account. And for the first time in weeks, my coffee got cold for normal reasons. Ethan texted me that night. Ethan's message was soft. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this. Can we talk?" He hadn't meant for it. That was his whole brand. He didn't mean for I'd his mom to run the show. He didn't mean for me to feel cornered. He didn't mean for help to become a trap. But intention doesn't refund your nervous system. I replied with one sentence. I need a life where my boundaries don't require a case number. Then I blocked him. Not out of spite. Out of respect for the version of me who kept her voice steady. A week later, the bank confirmed something important. A week later, I got a secure message from the bank. The dispute was progressing. The account was secured. They had contacted the merchant. They couldn't tell me everything, but they confirmed enough. The transaction was unauthorized from my side, and the documentation mattered. I saved the message as a PDF and filed it with the rest. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like relief, like I'd put my life back inside my own hands. And Diane never apologized. Of course she didn't. I saw Diane once after that, in a grocery store aisle, and she looked right through me like I was an inconvenience she'd already solved. That was fine. I wasn't trying to be understood by someone who confuses control for love. I drove home, coffee going cold in its paper cup, and realized something simple. The wedding wasn't what I lost. It was what I escaped. If someone helped you in a way that made you feel smaller, what did you do? Did you take the help or take your space back? Tell me, would you have opened Diane's envelope?